joining you from hyperdimensional space in 3D reality. What has happened around the world on planet Earth in a location near most of you concerning UFO crash retrievals, secret reverse engineering programs, and classified secret space programs. What you're going to get today is information, a lot of information that is really going to give you everything that you need to be able to communicate this to those around you, or for your own edification, your own desire to learn what's going on in this world, because we are reaching that tipping point, that we are at this critical transition for the entire planet when this topic shifts from a fringe topic within a fringe community. So within the conspiracy theory genre, UFOs and exopolitics are considered fringe theory, have been for decades now. We're going to move from that into the mainstream of public consciousness. And a lot of people are going to suddenly realize that this is real, and they are woefully unprepared. And they're going to look to people like you watching this to find out what's really going on. I mean, should we trust the government? Should we trust what they're telling us through the mainstream media? These are all important questions that everyone needs to be able to address. So what I'm going to do is just give you a little kind of a taste. This is how I'm going to do it today. So first part, I'm going to cover what happened in Italy and Nazi Germany concerning this topic of crash retrievals, reverse engineering, and secret space programs, and how all of that was carried over to the United States. And then when we come back from a 10-minute break, we are going to look at what happened in the Soviet Union, modern-day Russia, what happened in Britain, France, Australia, and China, all key players in this worldwide phenomenon concerning UFO crash retrievals. Italy. So it all began with a crash in 1933, communicated via telegram to the government of Benito Mussolini, the fascist Italian government. In 1933, in northern Italy, it was discovered that a UFO, or a flying saucer more correctly, had crashed. And so the Italian authorities naturally made this an issue of great interest, vital national security interests. There were 18 Italian documents concerning this crash and the aftermath of that crash that had been leaked. Now, the leaks came out in the 1990s. I think they have been known to Italian UFO researchers for decades, but they were released into the public arena. And so that's when the public got to see these official Italian documents. So what it was that crashed in 1933, the documents had a diagram, a sketch. One of the documents dated June 13, 1933. So we're talking 90 years ago. This is how far back it goes, this phenomenon of UFO crashes and governments finding these and studying them in secure classified facilities. So here's a sketch of a depiction of the crash. So you can see it kind of came in a horizontal trajectory, created a fissure in the ground, and then it was there embedded into the earth, and the Italian authorities found it. And that's how Italy began its secret space program studies. So it's very interesting to know that at that time in 1933, Italy was a major aviation country in the world. It was actually ahead of Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany had really just come into existence in 1933. So the Italian government saw itself as a major aviation power at the time. And it's always important to remember that in World War I, Italy fought on the side of the Allied powers against Imperial Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Italy came out of World War I with its military-industrial complex intact, and it was a major aviation power at the time, vying with other countries like France and the United Kingdom in terms of who has the most advanced aviation technology. So that gives us important context for understanding what it was that happened at that time and how significant this was, because Italy began a reverse engineering program. It began a research and development program that was called RS-33. The first MJ-12 set up to study the crash UFO situation in Italy. It was headed by Marconi. So Guglielmo Marconi, the famous inventor of the radio and a great inventor in his own rights that rivaled Nikola Tesla at the time, Marconi was based in Britain, but yet Benito Mussolini appointed Marconi to head up this top secret research institute in Italy. So because Marconi was working in Italy, he had companies, sorry, Marconi was working in the United Kingdom. Marconi had companies in the United Kingdom, and the British intelligence community was very much a big supporter of Guglielmo Marconi in the early 20th century, because Marconi didn't get support from the Italian government in the early 1900s for his invention, so he went to Britain. And the British intelligence community were very much behind and supportive of his idea of wireless radio communication, as opposed to telegram needing wires. So that's why Marconi was backed by the British intelligence community. So when Mussolini made Marconi the head of this top secret flying saucer research unit, whether he was aware of this or not, Mussolini was inviting the British intelligence community into this kind of research effort, because Marconi was very much tied into the British intelligence community. They were his major customer in Britain. So I'm sure Mussolini knew this, but at that time, remember, this was before World War II, Italy and the United Kingdom and France were allies. They had all fought together during the First World War, and so they were used to sharing technology. So Mussolini, through Marconi, was sharing some of this information with the British at that time. So this was a cover-up from the very beginning. One of the documents that was released was a senatorial letter describing in detail the strategy to be followed after the craft had been recovered, which included censorship of the newspapers, arrest of eyewitnesses, elaboration of a series of conventional explanations for this. So this was the very first cover-up of the UFO issue, and it began in Italy under the government of Benito Mussolini in 1933. Mussolini's initial belief was that these flying saucers were either British or French, and as I mentioned already, there was a significant connection between a significant connection between Britain and Marconi and Mussolini when it came to these flying saucer topics. I think one of the reasons why he chose Marconi to head up this flying saucer investigation was because Marconi would be able to ask the British and share the documents with the British and say, hey, this is what was found in Lombardy, Italy. Are these yours? Are you working on this stuff? And the British military intelligence community say, no way, no way, that's not ours, that's someone else's. So the British would have been very, very interested in that phenomenon. And then there were sightings in 1936 that involved two discs with a larger cigar-shaped craft. So you have a diagram in one of these documents showing that you have these cigar-shaped craft that could be like a mothership for these smaller saucer-shaped craft coming out of it. As Mussolini was learning about these flying saucer technologies that had been recovered and were also being cited, he learned about Nazi Germany also having a flying saucer program called the Haunebu flying saucer program, and we'll talk a bit about that later. So what happened was that up until the latter part of the 1930s, Britain and Italy kind of had a very cordial relationship. Winston Churchill, who became Prime Minister of Britain after 1938, I mean, he and Mussolini were mates. I mean, they corresponded a lot and they shared a lot of information. What happened in 1938 and 39, Mussolini learned that the flying saucer that had been recovered in Italy wasn't British, it wasn't French, that it was likely German, or at least associated in some way with Nazi Germany's Haunebu flying saucer program. So fascist Italy and Nazi Germany decided to collaborate. And so you had Nazi Germany and fascist Italy in 1939 in May signing the Pact of Steel agreement. And so that Pact of Steel was a military alliance. And I think one of the reasons that Mussolini decided to sign on to the Pact of Steel was that he realized that the flying saucer technologies, these were things were involving very advanced aviation technologies, and that Italy wanted to be part of that. And because it wasn't a British or French program, and the United States at that time had a minuscule aerospace program or aviation program, France and the British and the Italians had the major aviation fleets at that time. And so Italy, learning that Nazi Germany was working on these kind of fleets of advanced aviation technologies, flying saucers, they signed on to this Pact of Steel. Now, William Tompkins, he is a former US Navy operator who, during the Second World War, from 1942 to 1946, he was part of an espionage program run out of Naval Air Station San Diego, and there were up to 30 spies embedded in Nazi Germany monitoring their aerospace programs. They were very interested in what advanced aviation technologies the Germans were working on, because these appeared to be way ahead of what the Allies had at that time. So William Tompkins, this is what he had to say on the Italian secret space program. He said that the spies learned about a very large secret space program that had been led or created by the Italians, that was led by Giuliano Marconi, and that Marconi played a leading role in this program. So in addition to these leaked official Italian documents, here you have William Tompkins saying that at Naval Air Station San Diego in the 1940s, that the US Navy had learned of Italy having developed a advanced secret space program using these kinds of flying saucer technologies. So this, you can go to this article on my website. It's a fairly, what was it? I think that came out in 2016. This article was involved an interview I did with William Tompkins in San Diego. Actually, it was the first video interview of William Tompkins that came out. Others later interviewed Bill, but this was the actual very first video interview of Bill Tompkins. So what Bill Tompkins had to say on the Italian secret space program, and here you can see William Tompkins showing a miniature fleet that were precise replicas of an actual battle fleet that the US Navy had in Long Beach, California, in the harbor there. That's why William Tompkins was first brought to the attention of US Navy intelligence, because he was able to build these miniature Navy ships that were very precise replicas of the larger functional battleships and aircraft carriers in the Long Beach, California. So in the interview, I asked him, were Mussolini's engineers and scientists helping the Nazis develop these technologies? And Bill Tompkins said, well, there was actually a completely separate program from Hitler. In Italy, there was a massive one going. So you can see, you can go watch Bill Tompkins talk about the Italian secret space program at that link I have at the bottom there. So Bill Tompkins corroborated that there was in fact an Italian secret space program building flying saucers. And now we have another source, Giuseppe Belluzzo. He was the Italian Minister for Finance for Mussolini's fascist government. And he, in a newspaper article that came out in March of 1950, confirmed that there wasn't, in fact, a flying saucer program that fascist Italy was collaborating with Nazi Germany on. So now you have a third source confirming that Italy did have a secret space program, or that Italy and Germany were developing flying saucers for this secret space program. So there you have the initial programs involving a crash flying saucer, the reverse engineering efforts that involved Italy at first reaching out to Britain to find out what was going on in terms of these flying saucers. When they found out that the Brits had no idea what these craft were, they went to the Germans, and the Germans said, yeah, we know all about that. You know, why don't you join us? And so that accounted for that. So Mussolini did correspond with Winston Churchill. That is well known. So there's a book here that describes Mussolini's correspondence with Churchill. And as I said, I'm sure that some of this correspondence did cover these advanced aviation technologies that the Italians had stumbled onto. So Mussolini confided to Churchill about Italy's advanced aviation technologies. Confided might be not quite the correct word. Maybe he bragged to Mussolini. I think that was the kind of guy Mussolini was. He would have bragged to Churchill about, well, you know, we found these advanced technologies and they are just so far ahead of anything anyone else has. You don't have any like that, do you? And you know, you should make a deal with us and so forth. So what's interesting is that after the Second World War, Churchill travelled to the very area where the Italian flying saucer program had been established, which was adjacent to where this flying saucer had crashed in Lombardy, Italy, and where the research and development program began. So Italy had a secret space program, or Italy had a crash retrieval reverse engineering program, and it was successful to a certain degree in building some operational models of flying saucers. How successful, that is something hopefully we'll find out more about in the future. So let me shift over to Nazi Germany and their programs concerning crash UFOs. Now, you know, I've talked about this previously, so I'm going to try and move through this quickly so we can get to the newer material. So there was a memorandum on January 3rd of 1952. This was a memorandum from a brigadier general. It was a memorandum for General Sanford. So this is Sanford. So this is the Garland, Brigadier General Garland. He declares that German research on UFO technology dates to 1931. So 1931 is very interesting because that was before Hitler's Nazi party came to power in January of 1933. So in 1931, you had what was called the Weimar Republic, which was a republic, and it had gone through a lot of difficulties in its short history from the end of the First World War up until 1933, when it came to an end. But it was very progressive in many ways, and it had a number of very prominent civilian organizations working on all sorts of esoteric topics. So one of those organizations was the Vril Society. Now, the Vril Society was experimenting on several flying saucer prototypes at the time in the Weimar Republic. So Maria Ossich, she formed the Vril Society in the early 1920s, and she was helped by prominent German occultists. These were members of the Thule Society, and the Thule Society was a society that believed in Ultima Thule, which was this capital city of a advanced Aryan civilization somewhere in northern Europe called Hyperborea. So you find references to Hyperborea in ancient Greek legends. It did exist, and the Germans believed that Hyperborea at some point went into the inner earth, and these occultists believed that you could communicate with the Hyperboreans. So anyway, the Thule Society valued psychics, and so Maria Ossich was a very talented psychic, and so she was communicating with these different beings, whether it was the inner earth or with these beings that were extraterrestrials from the Aldebaran star system. So Ossich claimed to be in telepathic communication with the Aldebaran extraterrestrials. And so what she got from them were the schematics for building a spacecraft, actually more, to put it more correctly, to build a space-time vehicle. So she received technical information in the Sumerian language on building a Vril craft. So there you have a schematic of one of these Vril craft that were built. And in the 1920s, one of the prominent German scientists that worked with Maria Ossich on building these Vril craft was a professor at the Technical University of Munich, Professor Winifred Schumann, who is today better known for the person who had invented the Schumann resonance. He came up with the original figure of that. So he was a professor and director of the electrophysical laboratory, and he was a specialist in high voltage electrostatics and high temperature pressurized plasma, working with high plasma at very high temperatures. And so these specialties were things that came to the attention of the Project Paperclip scientists after the Second World War, or to the people running Operation Paperclip, who included Winifred Schumann among the German scientists that were taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base after the Second World War. So Professor Schumann was one of those original Paperclip scientists, and his specialty was these kinds of exotic propulsion systems using high voltage electrostatics and highly pressurized plasma. So he built what was called the first Schumann levitator for the Vril Society from 1922. So here's a leaked document, a Nazi SS document, and this shows one of the original Vril prototypes. It was approximately 12 meters in diameter. It could reach 12,000 kilometers per hour and could seat 2 people. So it could fly for about 5.5 hours, and approximately 17 of these craft were constructed and tested between 1942 to 1944 with 84 test flights. So this is what leaked Nazi SS documents state. And this is something that a number of researchers into the German UFO program have been able to translate. And yes, this was evidence that the Nazis were working on these Vril prototypes that were originally developed by the Vril Society. So the Nazis come to power in 1933 and take control of the Vril Saucer program. So Himmler's SS was the organization that was put in charge of these flying saucers, which was considered to be very highly classified, even more highly classified than the development of jet engines or jet aircraft, because the jet aircraft that was originally under the control of the Luftwaffe. Hermann Goering was in charge of these experimental jet planes, but the Nazi SS, they were going for the more exotic technologies like flying saucers and high voltage electrostatic propulsion systems and so forth. So the Nazis come to power in 1933 and they take over the Vril Saucer program. So in 1936, 1937, there are multiple references to a UFO crash somewhere in the Black Forest region near Freiburg in Germany. And so that's in that era, 1936, 1937, that they describe that. So apparently a craft had crashed in the Black Forest. The Nazis came across that craft, retrieved it, took it to their top aerospace facilities for research and development, and they combined what they learned from that craft with the real prototypes that they were developing, and they combined those technologies. Of course, the Vril technology, the Vril craft were transmitted telepathically and built through the Vril Society and the Thule Society. But this craft that crashed in the Black Forest region, I mean, here you have physical technology that presumably was extraterrestrial in origin. And that was something that the Nazis used to create this Haunebu program. So at some point, agreements were reached between Hitler's regime and reptilian extraterrestrials. Now, some of you might be new to this. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with reptilian extraterrestrials, but for those of you that are new to this information, there is a lot of data out there about these highly intelligent extraterrestrials that are reptilian in appearance. And you can find references to reptilians going into ancient history. Probably one of the best sources for that is the Indian texts, the classics. The Mahabharata, for example, talks about a race of reptilian or serpent-looking people called the Nagas. And the Nagas fought on one of the sides of the Mahabharata. And so these reptilians go back way into human history. And of course, you have the Bible, you have the serpent in the garden. I think that what that was referring to was one of these beings, or at least there was an awareness of these beings at that time. So anyway, so the reptilians and the Germans reached agreements at some point, and probably around that time when this craft crashed in Freiburg in Germany in 1936-37. So the Haunebu, I mentioned that already, the Haunebu 1, according to Vladimir Trzynski, a Bulgarian electrical engineer who came out in the early 1990s, and he was among the first, if not the first, to discuss a lot of these Nazi SS documents that had been leaked into the public arena. Presumably, these came from KGB files that had been released with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. And so because of the KGB was in charge of the was in charge of the UFO program in the Soviet Union, and I'll talk a lot more about that later. When the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of these files kind of escaped into the black market, and people could pay a price, and you could get authentic documents describing different historical events concerning flying saucers. So this is how these Nazi SS files got leaked into the public arena, that they had been previously kept by the KGB. And Trzynski, being part of the Bulgarian Academy of Scientists, he got access to these Nazi SS documents. And one of these documents apparently was a video of a Haunebu being test flown in Nazi Germany. So let me play you this. It is a silent video. So there you have a Haunebu being test flighted in Nazi Germany in 1939. So it really is just going through some kind of a test flight in a region of Nazi Germany. I can't remember the region where they were developing the Haunebu. I think that I think the name itself, Haunebu, derived from the region where these were being flight tested. But this was run by the Nazi SS, by Himmler, rather than the Luftwaffe. Goering's Luftwaffe was in charge of jet planes, because the Luftwaffe, up until the Battle of Britain, was held in high regard by by Hitler. And after the Battle of Britain had been lost, the Luftwaffe lost prestige, and these jet aircraft were then handed over to the Nazi SS. So the Nazi SS all along were working on the most advanced aviation technologies in Nazi Germany.